I never thought a simple trip back home could shatter everything I believed about love and loyalty. But that night, under the stars and beside the haystack, my heart raced for all the wrong reasons. When his hands brushed against mine, I should have stepped back, but instead I leaned in. And that's when I realized, some temptations are impossible to resist. I had always thought of myself as someone who valued stability. After graduating college, I returned to my childhood village, yearning for its peaceful simplicity. Life in the city had been exciting, bright lights, endless noise, and constant movement, but it had left me feeling hollow. The village, with its quiet charm and familiar faces, felt like a sanctuary where I could finally breathe. My grandparents had left me a spacious house, filled with memories of summers spent running through fields and helping with harvests. It was my haven, a place where I could reconnect with my roots. As soon as I arrived, old friends came to visit, eager to catch up and relive memories of our mischievous adventures. Among them was Brian, my childhood best friend, whose laughter and energy made it feel as though no time had passed. To celebrate my return, Brian organized a small gathering. We filled the table with homemade bread, cheeses, and rustic moonshine, a village tradition that brought a sense of nostalgia. The room buzzed with laughter and music as we sang old songs and shared stories about the lives we had built since leaving the village. It was during this gathering that I noticed Emily. She wasn't the shy girl I remembered from our childhood. She had grown into a confident, captivating woman whose smile seemed to light up the entire room. Her laughter drew me in, and I couldn't help but feel a pull toward her. As the night unfolded, our conversations grew more personal. She shared stories about her struggles in the city, her dreams of finding a simpler life, and her longing for something real. Her words resonated deeply with me. It was as if she understood the ache I had carried, the need to feel grounded, to feel alive again. When the night ended, most of the guests left, but Emily stayed behind. She claimed it was too late to walk home alone, but I sensed there was more to her decision. We sat outside, under the stars, talking and laughing until the silence of the night wrapped around us. And that's when it happened, the first flicker of something forbidden. The days that followed our late-night conversation with Emily felt different, charged with an energy I couldn't quite explain. She started stopping by more often, always finding an excuse to linger. Whether it was borrowing a book, asking for help with chores, or simply wanting company, her presence became a constant in my life. At first, it seemed innocent. We were just reconnecting, two old friends catching up after years apart. But there were moments, fleeting, yet undeniable, that made my pulse quicken. The way her eyes lingered a little too long when we talked, the way her laughter softened when we were alone, and the way her fingers brushed against mine, leaving a trail of warmth that refused to fade. I tried to dismiss it. She was just being friendly, I told myself. But then I noticed how her mood shifted whenever Brian was around. She grew quieter, more distant, as if she was hiding something. Brian, on the other hand, seemed oblivious, cracking jokes and flashing his easy smile, completely unaware of the tension simmering beneath the surface. One evening, we all decided to take a walk through the fields. The air was cool, and the sky was painted with streaks of pink and gold as the sun dipped below the horizon. Brian walked ahead, laughing and teasing Emily about her childhood crushes. She laughed along, but I noticed the way her eyes kept drifting back to me, as if she was waiting for some kind of reassurance. Later that night, as we sat around the fire, Brian pulled out his guitar and started playing softly. Emily sat beside me, her knee brushing against mine. The touch was subtle, but it sent a jolt through me. I glanced at her, and for a moment I saw it, the same longing that had been gnawing at me reflected in her eyes. I knew then that this wasn't just nostalgia or friendship. This was something dangerous, something neither of us dared to name. But instead of pulling away, I leaned in, drawn by a force I couldn't resist. The tension grew with each passing day. Emily's visits became more frequent, her excuses thinner. She started asking questions about my life in the city, my relationships, my dreams. It felt like she was peeling back the layers, trying to see the real me, and with every question, I felt myself letting her in. But guilt began to creep in too. Brian trusted me. He had always trusted me. And here I was letting my thoughts wander down a path I had no business walking. I told myself to stop, to keep my distance, but the more I tried, the harder it became. And then came the night that changed everything. Emily showed up at my door, her eyes red and puffy. She didn't say much, just that she needed someone to talk to. I let her in, and as we sat on the couch, her voice trembled as she opened up about her doubts and insecurities. "I feel so lost sometimes," she whispered, her eyes searching mine for answers. I wanted to comfort her, to take away her pain, but when I reached out to touch her hand, she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned closer, her breath warm against my skin. My heart raced as I realized how close we were. How dangerously close. The tension between Emily and me had become unbearable. Every glance, every accidental touch, felt heavier, loaded with unspoken words and dangerous possibilities. I knew I should stop, distance myself before it went too far. But something about her drew me in, no matter how hard I tried to resist. It started with little moments. She'd show up at my door with some excuse, a book she wanted to borrow, a question about the garden, or just to chat about nothing in particular. But those visits stretched longer each time. We'd sit on the porch, watching the sun fade behind the hills, her laughter mixing with the evening breeze. One afternoon, while helping her stack hay in the barn, she stumbled, losing her footing. I caught her before she fell, my hands gripping her waist. For a moment, neither of us moved. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, and when she looked up at me, her eyes were filled with something I couldn't ignore. I let go quickly, stepping back, but the damage was done. That brief contact lingered like an electric current between us. Later that evening, she returned, claiming she had left something behind. I knew it was just an excuse, but I let her in anyway. The house felt warmer, smaller somehow, with just the two of us inside. We sat by the fireplace, the flickering light casting shadows across her face as she talked about her struggles and dreams. When she reached out to touch my hand, her fingers trembling slightly, I didn't pull away this time. Instead, I intertwined my fingers with hers, feeling the softness of her skin. "We shouldn't do this," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "I know," she replied, but her voice wavered, betraying her hesitation. And then it happened. She leaned in, her lips brushing against mine, soft and hesitant at first. My breath hitched, and I should have stopped it right there, but I didn't. Instead, I pulled her closer, deepening the kiss, letting all the emotions I had been suppressing take over. The world outside seemed to fade away. The crackling of the fire, the softness of her touch, the taste of her lips. It all felt too perfect, too right, even though I knew it was so wrong. Afterward, we sat in silence, her head resting on my shoulder. Neither of us spoke about what had just happened, but the weight of it hung in the air. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, a moment of weakness, but deep down I knew better. The following days were a blur of stolen moments and whispered conversations. We met in secret, away from prying eyes, convincing ourselves that no one would find out. But the guilt gnawed at me, especially every time I saw Brian. He had no idea what was happening, no clue that the girl he trusted was falling into my arms. One evening, Emily and I found ourselves back in the barn, surrounded by stacks of hay that carried the scent of summer and childhood memories. The moonlight streamed through the gaps in the wooden walls, bathing us in a soft, silvery glow. She reached for me first, her hands trembling but determined. "I can't stop thinking about you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Neither can I confessed, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. We gave in again, helpless against the pull that seemed to bind us together. Every kiss, every touch felt more desperate, as if we were racing against time, knowing this couldn't last. But reality started closing in. Emily began to grow restless, her guilt surfacing in quiet moments when we were alone. "What are we doing?" she asked one night, her voice heavy with doubt. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "But I can't stop." And that was the truth. No matter how wrong it felt, no matter how much guilt ate away at me, I couldn't let her go. I knew we were on borrowed time, that the truth would eventually come out. But in those stolen moments, none of it seemed to matter. All that mattered was her touch, her smile, her laughter. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were headed towards something inevitable, something that would shatter everything. It was supposed to be just another secret meeting. Emily and I had become reckless, drawn to each other like moths to a flame, knowing full well that we were dancing on the edge of disaster. That evening, she had slipped away under the pretense of visiting a friend, but we both knew where she was going. We met in the barn, the place that had become our sanctuary. The air was thick with the scent of hay and secrecy, and the dim light of the lantern made her eyes glow. She was nervous, fidgeting with the hem of her dress as I wrapped my arms around her. "I hate lying to him," she whispered, her voice trembling. "So do I admitted, the weight of guilt pressing against my chest. "But I can't let you go." We kissed, desperate and hungry, as if trying to erase the shame that lingered in the corners of our minds. But the moment was short-lived. A noise outside, the crunch of footsteps on gravel, shattered the illusion. Emily froze in my arms, her eyes wide with panic. "Who's there?" came a familiar voice. It was Brian. My heart plummeted as the barn door creaked open, revealing his silhouette against the moonlit night. For a moment he didn't move. He just stood there, his eyes darting between us, taking in the scene, the disheveled hay, Emily's flushed cheeks, and the undeniable tension hanging in the air. "What the hell is this?" His voice cracked, raw with disbelief. "Brian, it's not what it looks like," Emily blurted out, stepping away from me as if putting distance between us could undo what had already been done. "Not what it looks like," he repeated, his tone sharpening. "I trusted you, both of you." I stepped forward, trying to explain, but he raised his hand to stop me. "Don't," he snapped. "Just don't." The look in his eyes gutted me, betrayal, anger, and heartbreak swirling together. Emily was crying now, pleading with him to listen, but he wasn't hearing any of it. "How long has this been going on?" he demanded, his voice shaking. Neither of us answered, and our silence said everything he needed to know. He turned to leave, but I grabbed his arm. "Brian, please, let me explain," I begged. "There's nothing to explain," he said coldly. "You're supposed to be my best friend. And you," he looked at Emily, his voice breaking. "You were supposed to be mine." And then he was gone, disappearing into the night, leaving nothing but the echo of his footsteps and the sound of Emily's sobs. I wanted to comfort her, but I couldn't move. The weight of what we had done pressed down on me, suffocating me. The fallout began almost immediately. Word spread like wildfire through the village. Whispers turned into accusations, and soon enough, Emily and I were the talk of every household. Brian refused to speak to either of us. I tried calling him, texting him, even showing up at his house, but he wouldn't open the door. Emily was no better off. Her parents were furious, and she started avoiding me, overwhelmed by shame and regret. I thought I could handle the fallout, but I was wrong. Everywhere I went, I felt the stares, heard the murmurs. I had betrayed not just my best friend, but the entire foundation of trust that bound our small community together. And then, one evening, Emily showed up at my door. "We need to talk," she said, her voice hollow. I let her in, but the moment she stepped inside, I knew something had changed. "This has to stop," she said, her eyes filled with tears. "What do you mean?" I asked, my chest tightening. "We can't keep doing this," she said. "It's destroying everything. I can't face my family, my friends, or myself." I reached for her, but she stepped back. "I love you," I said, desperate to hold on to her. "I love you too," she admitted, her voice breaking. "But love isn't enough. Not like this." And just like that, it was over. She left, and I let her go, even though every fiber of my being screamed at me to run after her. The next few days were a blur. I stayed inside, avoiding everyone, drowning in guilt and regret. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a prison. I tried to write Brian a letter, pouring out everything I wanted to say, but I couldn't bring myself to send it. What could I possibly say that would make any of this right? And Emily, I saw her once after that, walking through the village with her head down, avoiding my gaze. It was clear she was trying to move on, and I knew I had to let her. But even as I tried to rebuild my life, the memories lingered. The stolen moments, the whispered confessions, the nights spent wrapped in each other's arms. And the worst part, a part of me still wondered if it had all been worth it. The days that followed felt like punishment, an endless cycle of regret, shame, and isolation. The village, once a place of comfort and belonging, now felt suffocating. Whispers followed me everywhere I went. Faces I had known my entire life looked at me with disappointment and judgment. Brian was gone. He stopped coming around, stopped answering my calls and texts. It was as if I had been erased from his life entirely. And maybe I deserved that. Emily, too, had disappeared. After our last conversation, she avoided me completely. I saw her once through the window of the market, her eyes puffy and red, but she turned and walked out before I could approach her. The nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, replaying everything. Every moment we had stolen, every decision that had led to this mess. I could still feel her touch, hear her laughter, and smell the faint scent of hay that clung to her clothes. But now those memories felt like ghosts, haunting me, reminding me of what I'd lost. The village didn't make things easier. The rumor mill churned relentlessly. People whispered in corners, their eyes darting toward me whenever I walked by. I stopped going out as much, ashamed of the stares and judgment. But it wasn't just me who suffered. Emily bore the brunt of the scandal. Her parents had forbidden her from seeing me, and rumors spread that they were considering sending her away to live with relatives in another town. One evening, I saw Brian outside the local bar. He looked different, hardened, angrier. I worked up the courage to approach him, hoping to make things right. "Brian," I started, but he didn't even let me finish. "Don't," he said sharply, his voice cold and unrecognizable. "You don't get to talk to me." "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, his eyes burning with anger. "Sorry? You're sorry? Do you even realize what you've done?" he spat. "You didn't just betray me. You betrayed everything we had. I trusted you. I thought you were my brother. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but I couldn't." He was right. "I never meant for this to happen," I said. "Yeah. Well, it did," he snapped before turning and walking away, leaving me standing there with nothing but guilt and regret. I thought about leaving the village, about running away from the mess I had made. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Leaving felt like admitting defeat, like giving up on the life I had tried to rebuild. Instead, I buried myself in work, trying to drown out the noise and the memories. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the weight of what had happened. Months passed, and the whispers eventually died down, replaced by new gossip and scandals. But the damage lingered. Brian never forgave me, and Emily, well, she moved away, just like the rumors had predicted. I heard through mutual friends that she had started fresh in a new town, trying to rebuild her life. Part of me wanted to reach out, to tell her I still thought about her every single day. But I didn't. I let her go because I knew it was what she needed. As for me, I stayed in the village, carrying the burden of my mistakes. I rebuilt what I could, but some things couldn't be fixed. The trust one had broken, the friendships I had destroyed, they were gone, leaving scars that would never fully heal. Sometimes, late at night, I'd find myself walking to the barn, drawn by memories of what had once been. The haystack was still there, but it felt different now, emptier. I'd sit there, staring at the stars, wondering how things could have turned out if we had made different choices. But life doesn't give you do-overs. It just keeps moving forward, leaving you to carry the weight of your actions. And so I did. Time has a way of dulling the sharp edges of pain, but it never truly erases the scars. Months turned into seasons, and life in the village slowly settled into a rhythm again. People stopped whispering, and the judgmental stares faded. Yet, even as the world moved on, I felt frozen, trapped in the aftermath of my choices. I often found myself revisiting the moments that led to it all. The laughter, the stolen glances, the nights we thought no one would ever find out. It was easy to blame the circumstances, to say that it was fate or temptation, but the truth was simpler. We made choices and we paid the price for them. Brian eventually moved away. He said it was for work, but I knew it was to escape the memories of betrayal. We never reconciled, and that's something I'll have to live with for the rest of my life. Losing him wasn't just losing a friend, it was losing a part of myself. Emily's departure hit me differently. For weeks, I kept expecting her to walk back through my door, to tell me she missed me as much as I missed her. But she didn't, and maybe that was for the best. I learned through the grapevine that she had found someone new, someone who offered her the stability I couldn't. It hurt, but there was also relief in knowing she had found a way to move on. She deserved that much. As for me, I stayed. Leaving would have been too easy, but facing the consequences forced me to grow. I poured myself into rebuilding what I could, fixing fences, repairing the old barn, and helping neighbors when they needed an extra hand. Slowly, the village started to see me as more than the man who had caused a scandal. But the biggest lesson I learned wasn't about forgiveness from others. It was about forgiving myself. I spent so much time punishing myself, replaying the past, and wishing I could undo it all. But life doesn't offer second chances. It only offers the opportunity to be better moving forward. I often think about what I would tell my younger self if I could. I'd warn him about the cost of impulsive decisions, the weight of guilt, and the pain of losing people you care about. But I'd also tell him that mistakes don't define you. What you do after them does. The barn, once a place of secrecy and passion, eventually became a place of reflection for me. I stopped avoiding it, and instead used it as a reminder of how fragile trust and love can be. I won't pretend I'm proud of what happened, but I'm grateful for what it taught me. It made me more careful, more thoughtful, and more aware of how quickly lives can be unraveled by a single decision. And if there's one thing I hope people take away from this story, it's this. Temptation is never worth the cost of losing the people you love. Passion fades, but regret lingers. Today, I stand in the same village, surrounded by the same fields and hills that once felt like home. It's different now, quieter, lonelier, but it's also a reminder that life moves on, even when you think it won't. And maybe that's the real lesson. If you found yourself caught up in this emotional journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in their shoes? Could this betrayal ever be forgiven? Let us know. And make sure to stay tuned. Our next story will leave you questioning just how far someone would.